Hey, what's up everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Gwent, and today we're playing the brand new Barely Balanced seasonal event, which is an alternate game mode in which our entire starting deck gets replaced by 16 Elder Bears, all with different starting power, and our leader abilities are disabled. That means no abilities, just point slams. It also means our starting deck doesn't matter much, but I have a few tips to share before we get started. Now, as I was saying, because our leader ability will be disabled and every card in our starting deck will be replaced, our starting deck doesn't really matter. Except, because everything is being replaced, you can deliberately set up your deck to complete a few contracts. Those could include a contract for winning a match when every card in your starting deck costs 4 provisions, and since that doesn't really matter in this case, you might as well set up your deck with 4 provision cost cards. Another thing to consider is that there are contracts for winning 100 matches with all the different leader abilities, and so if you've been struggling to get a bunch of wins with one of the leader abilities in particular, you might as well use that leader ability because it's going to get disabled anyway, and if you do win, it's still going to count toward that difficult leader ability. Other than that, you might as well fill your deck with cards that you already have, or common cards that you aren't spending a bunch of scraps on a deck that's going to be replaced. So now let's get started. Alright, so starting off against Northern Realms here, but of course both our opponent's leader ability and deck and our leader ability and deck will be completely replaced, so that doesn't really matter. We both have exactly the same deck with entirely Elder Bears, which means no abilities at all, just point slams. And we have exactly 16 of them, which means just enough for a full-length match. That means unless somebody wins 2-0, both players are going to eventually play all of the cards in their deck. All of the bears have a different point value numbered from 1 all the way to 16. That means that the value of all of the units in both players' decks are exactly the same at 136 apiece. At least excluding the Stratagem, which means it's actually a pretty huge advantage in this event. But how do you win when your decks are identical? That is all up to game theory. We know exactly what our opponent can do, and our opponent knows exactly what we can do. With that in mind, we need to force our opponent to play suboptimally, so that by the time we get to round 3, we have more points remaining in our deck than they do, giving us the automatic win. The way that tends to happen is that somebody over-invests to win a round, allocating more points than they had to. For that reason, it's crucially important, especially once you've played at least 3 cards in round 1, to make sure that you never go over 1 point above your opponent's score, because every extra point that you use in round 1 is a point that you won't have in round 2 or round 3, meaning your opponent will have the advantage. That's easy at the beginning when you have access to all of your bears, because then you have lots of flexibility with how many points you put on the board. However, because you only have 1 bear at each number, the longer the match goes, the fewer bears you have, and the less flexibility you have as well. So while both players might start small to avoid overcommitting early, eventually you may get to the point where just to overcome a 1-point difference, you need to commit a huge high-point bear. In these cases, remember that it is still an option to play multiple smaller bears if they get you right to the number that you're looking for, rather than playing one really big bear that is a huge overcommitment. Because since you have such a wide range of power on all your bears, playing multiple smaller bears may still be more efficient than playing one really big bear, even if it means going a card down. You may still be saving points. The other thing to consider, though, is the Stratagem, because whoever has it has 5 more points in their deck than their opponent. So that actually means that for the person on red coin to win round 1, they must overcommit, because your opponent is basically getting 5 points for free. So pushing hard in round 1 on red coin is very, very dangerous. Which means that usually the best case scenario on red coin is to either keep it short and only play small cards, or wait until your opponent puts at least 6 more points up than you have, then pass. And 6 points is the key number because, assuming that they get 5 free points from their Stratagem, once they go 6 or higher, that's the threshold where they've started to overcommit. Meaning that at that point, you have more points in your deck than your opponent does. However, even if you still have more points in your deck than your opponent's, there are still some things to consider, because you haven't necessarily won just yet. On one hand, if your opponent dry passes, you want to have a low value card so that you aren't wasting points as your throwaway in round 2. On the other hand, if you still have some of your highest value cards in your deck and not available in your hand, your opponent could push in round 2 and either force you into making some awkward trades where you need to overcommit to win the round, or even push for the 2-0 win, which, even though you may have more points in total than your opponent does, if most of your points are still in your deck, they may still be able to beat you in round 2, especially if you held onto 1 or 2 of your low value cards as potential throwaways. Now remember to do the math here, because in some cases it may still be more efficient to go cards down to just barely overtake your opponent rather than force yourself into overcommitting with one of your bigger bears, potentially undoing the progress that you made in round 1. Because once again, if you're trying to win the round, you want to win by the smallest increment possible so that you aren't overcommitting and wasting points for round 3. But as you start to run out of bears, this is where the math can begin to get very awkward. Fortunately, if the most efficient way for you to pass your opponent is by playing multiple cards, your opponent may erroneously assume that it would be a good time for them to pass, only for you to play the ace up your sleeve. Then in round 3, the game will automatically play all of each player's cards because there's no more trades to be had. Both players are eventually just going to play all their point slams. At this point, you should already know who's going to win, but if you haven't been keeping track, then this is your moment of truth. Alright, so last time we did a match in which we were on red coin and deliberately played small in round 1 so that we saved our big stuff for round 2 and round 3 to hold on for the win. This time we're going to do something similar, except on blue coin, which is much easier because then you have the stratagem, which means that we start the match with 141 points total, but our opponent still only has 136. Meaning that we could either use that 5-point advantage in round 1 to win round 1 without actually using as much power from our bears as our opponents, or in this case, with all of our weakest bears, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 through 9, we can deliberately just play our weak bears here in round 1, and invite our opponent to either match or even pass us, but commit more than we commit. Usually I don't start with the 1 power bear, otherwise I feel like that's just too obvious and our opponent is going to read us. But by playing our 2 and 3 power bears, we're outscoring our opponents while still only committing our low value cards. I'm also saving the 1 power bear in case we do let our opponent win round 1 and we need a throwaway in round 2, in which case the 1 power bear would be ideal. But be careful, because as we said in the previous match, if you do lose round 1 and you're saving 1 or 2 weaker bears as your throwaway in round 2, assuming that your opponent will dry pass and give you a free chance to play those cards, they could still push you in round 2, and if you have multiple weak bears, even if you still have more points in your deck than your opponents, if those strong bears aren't in your hand, and your opponent does have some of their better cards in their hand, then they may still be able to 2-0 you. At this point, we already have a 7-point lead, which means we don't need to play anything big, otherwise we risk overcommitting in round 1. Even if we had played that 1 power bear, then we would be up by 8 points, and remember, we only got 5 free points from our stratagem, so that means we would be overcommitting. Just by 3 points, so it wasn't a ton, it was theoretically still an option, but why win after overcommitting 3 points when we could instead either win by overcommitting 2 points, or encourage our opponent to pass us here by 2 points plus the 5 free points that we had from the stratagem means we have a 7-point advantage for the rest of the match. Now we just need to be careful not to be bled heavily in round 2 or have our opponent take a 2-0 win if we try to get too clever with weak throwaway cards. We do have our 1 power bear, which is ideal if they dry pass, but we also have our 13, 14, 15, and 16 in case they push hard. And it looks like they are trying to bleed us at least a little bit here by playing a low value card, hoping that we'll be forced into playing one of our bigger cards. They may realize that they overcommitted in round 1 and now need to find a way to bleed out some of our better cards in round 2, otherwise they're guaranteed to lose. This is why we kept some of our medium value bears in hand. Otherwise, even if they played one of their lower value bears, we might have had no choice but to play one of our bigger bears. Depending on how many cards your opponent has at the beginning of round 2, you can anticipate how many cards at minimum you expect them to play. In this case, they started with 9 cards. That means that because they draw 3 cards going into round 3, we could expect them to at least play 2 cards to drop them down to 7, so that at the start of round 3, they drop back into the maximum of 10. That means we should have at least expected those first 2 bears, but that third bear suggests that they are trying to push at least a little bit further in round 2. And in this case, because we've already played several of our bears, we no longer have the perfect number to overtake our opponent by 1 point, forcing us to overcommit a little more than we'd like. In this case, the key thing to remember is how many points your opponent overcommitted to win round 1. And in this case, they overinvested by 7 points. That means if we can pass them by less than 7 points, then we are set up to win round 3. If we pass them by exactly 7 points, then we'll tie, and if we pass them by more than 7 points, then they'll win. That's why their round 1 overcommitment was such a big deal. The bigger it is, the more margin you have for error in round 2. And therefore, the more likely you are to fend off their bleed attempt in round 2, win, and still keep enough points in round 3 to win that round as well. That's why in this case, going up by 5 points still isn't that much of a concern. And if we already have a lead and they start to play some bigger bears, while we still have some medium value bears, we can still win some of these later exchanges, tilting things even more in our favor, as we are now lowering the value by which we are overcommitting. So we improved the deficit by 1 last time, now we're going to have to make it 1 point worse, so functionally the past 2 turns canceled each other out. But again, as long as we remain below that 7-point margin, we will still have more points than them in round 3 and take the win. And at this point, they may realize that their previous trades have not been that successful. So at this point, they're trying to brute force their way to a 2-0 win, which, because they still had some of their strongest bears, they might have been able to do. But that's why I held on to our 15 and 16 power bears in case they tried to do that. Because here's their 16 power bear, and if we didn't have ours, we would have been in a lot of trouble, especially because we held on to our 1-point bear, which meant that even though we had more points total in our deck than our opponent, a lot of those points were still in our deck, not our hand, which is risky because you might get bled like that. But because we beat them by less than 7 points in round 2, we know we have more points remaining in our deck than they do, so when we put our cards on the table, we know we'll take the win. Alright, so this time I'm going to show you how to win a match by winning round 1 on red coin, which, as we just saw, is very difficult to do and still pull off the round 2 or round 3 win. So this is definitely a high-risk strategy that I generally wouldn't recommend, but as I'll show you here, it is still possible. And first of all, it means we're going to have to play very aggressively in round 1 and actually willingly overcommit, which, especially when you have almost all of your weaker bears, is an even harder case to be made. Because generally, it would be easier to play our 1, 2, and 3 power bear here in round 1 so that we have all of our strongest bears saved for round 2 and round 3. Because yeah, we now have bears 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9. But as I said, if we're trying to win round 1 on red coin, we need to be aggressive. Even if they play just their lowest bears, because they have that stratagem, at a minimum they will have 11 points, which means even this 8-point bear is not necessarily an overcommitment. That, and it might encourage them to play a little more aggressively as well. Given that they still haven't used their stratagem, the 4 power bear is currently our most efficient play. However, because I want to encourage them to play some of their medium power bears as well, I'm still going to go with something a little more aggressive. Because at a minimum, we're still going to play at least one more card and we could always make that our 1-point bear. Which, given how we started with cards much bigger than that, they probably aren't expecting us to use. And because we still had a bunch of our lower powered bears, we would have had a good answer to almost anything they played on that previous turn. If you want to play even more reverse psychology, you could deliberately play the 2 rather than the 1 here to try to convince our opponent that we don't even have our 1. But now that this is our 3rd and potentially final card that we'll play in this round, we'll play it safe. And they will keep going here with another one of their relatively low value cards, but because we still have many of our low value cards, we have a ton of flexibility to overtake them by just the right amount. And they'll pass here, which means we get the perfect 1-point round 1 win. However, because we were on red coin and they had the 5 points from their stratagem, that means we actually spent 6 more points than them in order to get that win. That's why winning round 1 on red coin is very high risk, and generally I wouldn't recommend it. Best case scenario, you're still down 6 points going into round 2. Which now gives us an okay but not great margin for error. So what we need to do is play our lower cards here and force our opponent into playing something higher than our cards, and if we trade enough of our low cards for enough of their big cards and force them into winning this round by 7 or more points, then by the time we get to round 3, we'll have more points than them in our deck and we'll win the match. So as soon as we see them with a 7-point lead or more, we should pass. This is the other reason why we played most of our mid-value cards in round 1, so that we still had some of our lowest ones in round 2, so that we'd have a better chance of getting some good trades here. We still have our bad cards, they've already used most of their bad cards in round 1. And that sets up this. They've passed us by 10 points now, which means we have more points remaining in our deck than they do at this point, so this is where we should pass. Because since they overcommitted in round 2 more than we overcommitted in round 1, we'll take the round 3 win. Even though they had that 5-point advantage from their stratagem. So winning round 1 on red coin and then winning the entire match is difficult, but it is possible. Alright, so going up against monsters here, not that that matters too much. What does matter is we're on blue coin here, so we'll have our stratagem. And we have 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6, so a lot of our lower cards, and then we have a 15, but no 16, so otherwise we have a lot of mid-value stuff, and I don't love the mid-value plays in general, because it's hard to know when and where it is best to use those. Yeah, well, alas, more mid-value stuff here, because I generally like to play low in round 1, and then use our stratagem to help us take the round 1 win nonetheless, or force our opponent to invest more than we invested to win round 1, so that we have an advantage in round 2 and round 3. But then having the mid-value stuff, you know, do you play it in round 1? Do you save it for round 2 or round 3? It gets potentially a little awkward. I'm going to start with the 5, though, because that is just barely on the edge of mid-value cards. It's low enough that we don't feel too bad about using it in round 1, but it also is high enough that it sends the message to our opponent that, hey, they can't just sneak on past and expect to win round 1 if they play small stuff here. So why don't we continue to go a little bit lower, though? I mean, yes, we could just match them with a 6 here, or we could go with a 3 and just barely surpass them, but that's not that significant just yet, because at the very least, we're both going to play one more card in this round, right? And we still have our Stratagem as well. So now we could go as low as 1, use our Stratagem, and then overtake them. And they've already committed 2 more points than we have. We both played a 5, but they've played a 6, whereas we played a 4. So if we do this, that means we have overtaken them, and it will cost them even more to catch us here. Okay, but they do play low. So technically speaking, that means that they've played 2 more points than us here and 1 more point than us here. Compared to the 5s, again, matched. This is 2 more points. This is 1 more point than what this initially was. This was a 5, or rather, this was 1 before we boosted it by 5 with our Stratagem. So we could just pass here. Probably should just pass here unless we want to go 3-point Elder Bear and guarantee that we win, or at least put some serious pressure on them in round 1. I think I will. So I'd like to at least see if we can push for the 2-0 win here. Yeah, so it is a little bit of an overinvestment from us. We won the round by 5, which means because 5 of those points came from our Stratagem, we technically have exactly the same number of points in our deck right now. So that means it's all going to come down to what do we have in round 2. Because if we have big stuff, we could try to either bleed them out a bit or just go for the 2-0 win. We have 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9... and now 8. So we have the best possible hand, do we not? 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. They cannot outscore us, except, well, they have 1 more card than we do. Hey. Okay. We're going to try it, though. So let's start sort of middle ground. Try to make it a little bit awkward for them to match us perfectly. Because they may have a 9, they may have a 10. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go up by a strange number. Okay, so that's not enough for them. So now if we go up by 8, then that means they need to play a 9, which they, for whatever reason, did not choose to do last time, or really a 10. That's not good enough. Okay, so if they continue to play low stuff, then that continues to show us that we have better cards in this round than they do. Did they play a 1-point bear in round 1? We can still see what the value of the bears was over here. We can't see in the graveyard, but okay, so here's the thing. We know they've not played their 1-point bear. So it's either in their deck, or if it's in their hand, then I believe we've guaranteed that we've won, because they've already shown that they have not been able to match us thus far. If they have a 1 as well, then we can just point slam our way to victory here. So we did not have anything as low as a 7 or an 8. So yeah, that's basically what we're going to do. We do have a 10. 12. I mean, we could be predictable and just go up by 1 every time. Or we could mix it up a little bit and see if we can mess with them a bit. Because if we go... yeah, actually, if we go 16 here, or even 15, then we're up by, what is this, 17 here, which is impossible for them to do in 1 card. Which means they have to 16. And they still have to play 1 more card. So technically speaking, passing right here would be perfect. They may still have the 1 in their hand. If they do, then they can tie us at 65, but that's not good enough because we won round 1. So then that means they need to play something even... Or, well, I mean, can't play anything bigger than a 16, but they're either playing their 1 and some other throwaway, but we know they've gotten rid of most of their other throwaways, or they're playing something else that's going to be huge, which means we are definitely going to win in round 3. So this is the perfect time for us to pass. Technically, we might have been able to push all the way for the round 2 win, but oh, okay, 3 is actually not a bad trade, though that does confirm that we would have won had we pushed all the way. So we still have our 2 is one of the things that we were hiding, but they still have their 1. So when it comes down to the point slams, who has more? The answer is us. Alright, going up against Syndicate here, not that that matters too much. What is important is that we're on blue coin here, so we'll get our stratagem. Okay, and so, let's see, we have some of the biggest stuff here. 14, 15, no 16. And our 1 as well. Oh, we do have our 16. Okay, so we have, yeah, all the big stuff. No 13. But, okay, tell you what I think we do. Let's get rid of some of the middle ground stuff, like the 7. Yeah, that doesn't really change things. I'd like to play the small stuff round 1, and then save the big stuff for maybe pushing for 2-0. Yeah, there's a 2, so that is something we can play in round 1. We can go 1, 2, 3. Okay, or lower still. Okay, so what I'd like to do, though, is rather than immediately dropping the 1, let's start off with the 3, because I think that sends a little bit more mixed messages to our opponent. If we drop the 1 on turn 1, then our opponent knows that we're going the low strategy, and they can just try to match us, and they will try to match us here. But if we continue to just ease on in with the still relatively low cards, we'll see if they can match us perfectly, or if they have to overpay at some point. They actually go under value there. Okay. Alright, I think we go 2 here as well, but then let's use our stratagem. Because this was a 2 from our starting hand. Oh, okay, so they're going minimum value here. Yeah, okay, I see. So yeah, this is what we could have done. We were technically capable of doing it. But, see, if they want to catch us, I think we actually pass here. And that way, if they want to catch us, we paid a 2 from our starting deck in order to get a 7 once we added the 5 from our stratagem. So that means they'd have to pay more to match us than we paid to put this on the board. So I think we pass here. I don't love that we still have our 1. Now, if they pass, which is probably the best move, because this is overpaying. It is the perfect amount for them to win round 1 because of that stratagem. The math is still not working out in their favor. And we both played most of our low to middle value cards. They've already played their 1. We obviously have not. So if they dry pass, this is our go-to. Then again, they have at least 2 throwaway cards here, which means probably not going to be able to sneak in our 1 here. But if we combine that with, well, what is nice about the 1, I mean, we have to play it at some point, yes. But it can be a nice way to match the exact value of whatever they're playing. Because if you have all these high increment cards, it's very easy to overinvest in the round. So let's get rid of one of our mid-value ones. Well, okay, we'll get more mid-value. So they're going to presumably play at least 2 cards here, which is the tricky part. It's hard to read what they're going for here. So I think, given how we still have R6, we have the ability to play 1 more card in this round than they do. This is where having the 1 is still valuable. We can just match them, and then have our last card be this 1 to be the tiebreaker. Yep. That's exactly what we plan to do. So they could pass here, in which case this is the play. Otherwise, now it starts to get trickier. Now it does start to get trickier. So our lowest, yeah, we mulliganed out what we might have had. At least the 10, possibly the 9 at one point as well, if not the 8. So now we kind of need to go 11. technically they did still overinvest in round 1, I think more than we have overinvested here. They go 10, puts them, oh, ooh, okay, hold on. Let's see, because we still have at least one mid-value card. So this gets us up to 29, then 30, that's still not enough. It's still a very awkward number for us. Yeah, we, as it turns out, would have liked some of those middle value bears. I kept the high ones just in case they tried to push 2-0, which might be what they're going for here. But now we've really no choice but to jump up to 12, which is actually not that much of an overinvest. Just outscored them by 5 here. Okay, and now this is enough to perfectly match them. But no, that's not going to work when they've won round 1. So this is a good bleed on their part. They're going to want to pass soon. That might have been just enough for them to win. If not, possibly just tie. Okay, they do drop the 16. Now, this is great for us. Because that means rather than investing our 16 here, we can make up, let's see, what do we need? We need exactly 10. We still don't have the 10. We don't have to invest 16, is at least why it's good. So we can pay less than they paid here. So it's a slight improvement in that way. Yes, yeah, so, okay, this is why we saved the big stuff, because they are seemingly trying to push 2-0. And that means, I mean, we can swap 15 for 15. Not getting any better for us, just keeping things as is. They've already played their 16, now this gets awkward. Now this does start to get awkward, let's see. So they have an 8-point lead, which means this is not good enough, so we do need to throw down the 16. So this is where it hurts. They should pass now. Okay, and this is the thing. They should not have done that, because we deliberately saved some of our big stuff just in case they tried to push for the 2-0. We win by 1 point, which is the perfect amount, of course. Now, we will have one extra card in round 3. It's just 1 extra point is really all that matters. But more importantly is that they have overinvested more than we've overinvested. We won a round by 1 point. They won a round possibly by 1 point as well, but because we had the Stratagem in round 1, giving us basically a free 5 points, that means that we will still win this. Just going to be point slams in round 3 because there's no gamesmanship left to be had, but we'll take the win. 5-point difference from the Stratagem. So there's a look at the brand new and absurd Barely Balanced seasonal event. If you liked the video, then make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, and I don't think we'll make any more decks for this event because, well, our starting deck gets completely replaced. But thank you all for watching, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you next time.